Hey, everybody, and welcome to Learning from Smart People. I am your host, Rob Oliver. And again, thank you for taking some time to spend some quality time here learning from smart people. My smart person guest today is Michael Dermer. He is better known as the Lonely Entrepreneur. He runs a website. And listen, let me tell you what the Lonely Entrepreneur is all about. It is a place that helps entrepreneurs with the number one issue we all face, the struggle. We know what it's like to feel energized and overwhelmed all at the same time. And the Lonely Entrepreneur provides knowledge, tools, and ongoing support for businesses globally. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, let's start kind of with your backstory, if you don't mind, because you weren't. Well, let's just start it. You weren't always kind of an entrepreneur. You were doing a bunch of other stuff. So let's start way back, and tell us kind of where you started, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I started my career as a mergers and acquisitions lawyer. I went to Bucknell University and Northwestern Law School, worked for a large New York law firm. And, I was there for 3 years, and I was kind of itching to start a business. I was more of a business guy than a law guy. And, but I was poking around, and I literally stumbled upon the business that I started. I was, out to dinner one night with a bunch of friends. One of my buddy's wives was pregnant, and she said, do you know for every 10 women that don't follow their prenatal care, it costs the healthcare system $1 million? And you're like, what do you mean? And I was like, why wouldn't you just pay these people? Why wouldn't you just pay these people to do what you wanted them to do if it saved money? And that was kind of, as they said, the beginning of the end. Started poking around and left my law job and started what got to be known as the first company in the US to reward people for being healthy in the early 2000s.
Fantastic. And so you start this business, and things are going well, and you're expanding, and then Calamity hits. Tell me what happened that kind of turned everything upside down.
Well, it's interesting because it actually didn't go so well. When we first started the business, people said, we are never going to reward people for being healthy. We are never going to reward people for doing the things they should be doing. So we fought for the better part of 5 years to evangelize this concept. Then from '06 to '08, we grew like crazy, venture capital back. So, in '08, we had kind of, made it and really had created a brand new category in healthcare. And we were venture capital backed, and we were trying to decide what we were going to do at that point. And, all of our clients were the biggest companies in America. And then the financial crisis hit. And what we built basically in 10 years almost got destroyed in 10 days. All of our clients were the biggest companies in America. Countrywide Financial, General Motors, and Washington Mutual were our 3 biggest clients. And 2 didn't exist about a month later, and we all know GM needed a bailout. So we went from being on top of the world to literally trying to save this business we had built for 10 years.
Wow. And so you're struggling with this, and this leads you to kind of this concept of the lonely entrepreneur. Tell me where you came up with the idea. And I mean, I love the title, but tell us a little bit about that.
So, after the financial crisis hit, we battled and scrapped and clawed and, robbed Peter to pay Paul. And really through the work of a bunch of people over the course of a couple of years, we kind of stabilized and built it back up and ultimately got approached and sold it. So it worked out great, but it was an incredibly wild ride. And after that experience, building a company, saving it, selling it, I wasn't really planning on doing anything next. I was fortunate to sell a company, and I was literally just in New York where I live, helping entrepreneurs for fun. And one of them said to me, being an entrepreneur is really lonely. And I was like, it's interesting, but kind of forgot about it. And then I was walking down the street with a friend of mine in Union Square, and I said, lonely entrepreneur. He goes, what'd you just say? And I said, lonely entrepreneur. And he said, that's it. I go, what do you mean? He goes, that's what we all share, is the struggle. And I was like, okay. And he literally dragged me into Starbucks, and he yelled, who here is a lonely entrepreneur? And like everybody put their hand up. And I was like, okay. And that was it. And then, that was the beginning of the end, as they said. But for me, my desire was not to write a book and stand in front of 20 people. My desire was that, this stuff was happening across the dinner tables in America. And I really wanted to get tools in the hands of people to help them turn their passion into success. So we built this this platform that you described before. And that was the beginning of the end, as they say.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you say this because that loneliness happens on so many different levels. Even
Yeah.
your experience of having this vision of getting rewarding people for being healthy, and that feeling of loneliness in which you're passionate about this, and yet you can't get anyone to buy in on
Right.
what's going on, and that's the start of it. So then you know you finally build this up, and then all of a sudden you have this lonely feeling of the financial crisis hits, and now I'm out here all by myself, all my clients are gone. That there is so many different levels of loneliness. Can you share with us a little bit, either from your own experience or from the experience of some of the folks that you work with? What are those different areas in which people are experiencing that loneliness?
It's so interesting because, there aren't too many other areas of life that implicate so much of your being, right? It's your personal, professional, ego, emotional, financial, family, like everything is implicated by an entrepreneurial venture. And so across that, exactly as you said, there are things that go related to just getting your idea off the ground, other people doubting, talking with family members, investors. The first time an investor says they don't like your pitch, it's like somebody called your baby ugly, right?
Right.
And so there's all of this stuff. And I don't think it's literally lonely. I think when you put the word next to lonely entrepreneur, it's just the struggle, right? It's just the steps along the way. But they are numerous, and there isn't a map, right? Everybody says, somebody will say to me sometimes, they'll go, well, if I could just blank, right? If I could just have capital, but if you ask 20 people, their blank would all be different.
Sure.
And so it implicates so many different things. So there's struggle along that way.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I've heard the concept of being in business for yourself, not by yourself,
Yep.
and that there is, and sometimes there is that loneliness that comes with, you know, my family members. They've got the steady job, and they go to work, and they have the paycheck, and they know it's, and here I am, and things are up and down for me, and things change, and there is that. But no, I really think that you're hitting on the key element. It's a struggle. It's a continuous battle. And so as you're looking at this struggle and you're helping entrepreneurs, as you said, for fun, what are the kind of things that entrepreneurs are looking for? You said, a lot of them are, if only I could blank. Are you finding that every entrepreneur has a different blank, or are there oftentimes recurring themes that are coming up in it?
Yeah, there's definitely recurring themes that come up in it because there's lots and lots of people that have talent or an idea, right? So, and that's very different from having a business, right? So I think one of the hardest things for entrepreneurs is that they don't know what it's supposed to look like. Like when you go and buy a car, that it's supposed to have tires and a steering wheel and a motor. You don't know that about an entrepreneurial venture if you're a technologist or a doctor or a fashionista or whatever it is. So when they don't have that context of all the pieces, that becomes really hard. I think one of the most important things that entrepreneurs face now is, right now, even before COVID, there was hyper competition in every arena. And everybody perceived, even pre-COVID, you could get things for really, really, really cheap, if not free, right?
Right.
After COVID, that's been exacerbated, right? There's even more competition because now, the yoga studio doesn't just compete with the yoga studio down the street. They compete with the yoga studio in Shanghai, right?
Right.
And now there's so many people chasing the same dollars, right, that you could literally get everything for free. So I think the biggest thing now for entrepreneurs is what we call it, lonely entrepreneur, finding a playground where nobody else is playing. You really have to find a go-to-market space where it's just you, where you literally define it and you fill that void and it becomes you, because people don't pay attention. There's too much clutter and competition, and you can always get it for free. So there's these kind of go-to-market approaches around finding a playground where nobody else is playing and establishing a certain know-how where nobody can compete with you because you have a know-how that even if somebody gave it away for free, you could never lose to. So these are obviously much more complicated conversations than just this, but it's the finding the playground and standing out amongst this competitive world that I think is the most challenging things that entrepreneurs will face, certainly post-COVID.
Okay. I think I'm understanding what you're talking about in finding a playground where no one else is playing. Is that, for lack of a better term, super niching, where you're finding a place where it's just you in that area, or is there more to it than that?
Well, super niching could be one technique. So, for example, take my old business, rewarding people for being healthy. There were tons of loyalty programs out there, right? Credit card, airline, hotel, all these loyalty programs. All we did was apply it to healthcare,
Okay.
right? So, and we became an N of one, right? So it was just one of those things where, right, it was only us, and then you define it. So it might be positioning, it might be niching, it might be the way you go to market. I mean, there's a million different ways, but at the end of the day, you've got to be able to do it. And think about Starbucks, right? Starbucks is frankly a really silly concept. When it started, the world didn't lack coffee, right? Where I live in New York City, there's coffee on every corner. It's actually pretty good, and it costs probably $1.75. And Starbucks said, we're going to bring more coffee. We're going to put a store on every corner, billions of dollars of real estate. We're going to charge $4. Right. And oh, by the way, if we don't sell any coffee, right, we're stuck with all this real estate. But what they did do, the playground they created, was that they created a community. They said, come here, just hang out, meet here, right? So I think that super niching is part of it, and a lot of times the way you find this playground isn't so linear, because if it was linear, everybody would do it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. And you're finding it a way in which you're doing it, and you're doing it in your way, and your way stands out. And that's cool.
And I think also you get to define it, right? Because if you're playing by everybody else's rules, right, we're all entrepreneurs, right? You have less capital and less resources. But if you define it, as we like to say, you define the speed limit in your country, right? And you get to know it, you define it, you set traps for others, right? And then you feel like what's so hard, I think, for us entrepreneurs these days, when you wake up every day, you feel as if there's going to be a news flash tomorrow that says Apple cares about your business segment, right?
Right.
And I worked all my life, and I did all this stuff, and I didn't have this resource, and I worked for 3 years and burned my savings, and somebody could else come along and just go like that. So finding this playground where you use your know-how, right? Think of it this, where do you live? I'm sorry, I don't know.
I'm in Pittsburgh.
So if you're in Pittsburgh, right, and you're going to go for a run on the Allegheny, right? And you're like, and I came to visit you, and I said, hey, I want to go for a jog. You'd be like, remember, there's a pothole right here.
Okay.
So be careful. That's what I mean by when you define your playground and you define your speed limit, right? Everybody is following you. You're setting the rules. You're setting the criteria versus, hey, I'm a PR firm and I'm going to sell the way every other PR firm sells. And I have a very little chance of standing out.
Yeah. And I mean, this is the same thing. My son has a sign in his room that says something along the lines of, be the best version of you possible, because everybody else is already taken. So the idea is, don't strive to be someone else, strive to be you. And in your uniqueness, that's what is kind of, in some ways, your selling point. You talked about COVID, and right now being in a pandemic and with all of the adversity is this a good time to be an entrepreneur, a terrible time to be an entrepreneur, or is the timing not that important?
It's a little bit of both. So it depends on where you are. And as you know, unfortunately, we know way too much about this, because 2008, right, is very, very similar. Dramatic impacts happen in a day. Here's what I would say. For new entrepreneurs, it's actually a great time, because there's lots of capital, there's lots of assistance, right? Things are less expensive, right? Because you can get services and rent and all these things super less expensive. So in a lot of ways, if you're starting new, right, there's lots of opportunities, because you have all the support and you have a cost structure that's much less than it was before. For existing entrepreneurs, the challenge is, you operated with $100 of revenue before and, $70 of cost. And now you're operating at, $50 of revenue, and you got to figure out how to get your $70 of cost down to 30. So it's hard. There's obviously support like there's been never before, for example, from the government. And you're fundamentally having to learn how to pivot. But I think the biggest thing for existing entrepreneurs is the competition, right? That yoga studio, Yeah, they competed with the yoga studio 10 blocks away, but they weren't competing with Peloton.
Right.
And you get more people chasing less dollars. So I think existing businesses really have to try to find that playground and be very different. If you're just putting different sprinkles on the ice cream cone, that's what everybody else is doing.
Sure.
And so I think for existing businesses, it takes the wherewithal of great entrepreneurs to get from point A to point B, whereas new businesses can go in with a less lower cost structure and entry point than ones that exist.
Yeah, and in some ways, because of the pandemic, you're seeing new areas of need where new businesses there were needs that exist right now that we weren't aware of before or that we weren't experiencing before.
Yeah,
And
of course.
you
Yeah.
know, and you have companies like, and I know that Zoom is not necessarily an entrepreneur-based company, but where Zoom was a peripheral company before, now it becomes an integral part of what's going on. And
Yeah.
you're finding, because of the nature of what's going on, there are new needs, new areas to be explored, and new
No doubt.
businesses.
No doubt there's segments that have emerged that didn't exist, but there's also segments that have gotten decimated. So it's just how adept we are as entrepreneurs is using our creativity to find our playgrounds.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this also, that right now in the virtual sphere that we're in, entrepreneurship is really exploding among all different types of people. Okay,
Yep.
and so for somebody like me who has a disability, becoming an entrepreneur, it's the playing field's level because we're all virtual, we're all doing,
Yep.
and I'm thinking about a bunch of other minorities that are being that are becoming part of the entrepreneurial field. And you're doing some work specifically with African American entrepreneurs. Is that right? Can you tell me about that?
Sure. We recently launched something called the Black Entrepreneur Initiative, which is the goal of putting our platform in the hands of 100,000 Black men and women. As I shared with you before, one of the core products of Lonely Entrepreneur is this platform called the Learning Community that has hundreds of learning modules and ongoing support. And what we took that platform and added to it with the help of about 60 Black leaders throughout the country to say, what additional information do Black entrepreneurs need to address the issues and opportunities that they face, like pattern bias and access to capital? And so we take that platform and we go to corporations and philanthropies that are interested in having an impact on this important social issue. And they provide us a little bit of funding so that we can give this platform available to Black men and women for free. And our goal is 100,000 throughout the country.
That's awesome. I love that you're looking at a social need, a social issue, and utilizing your business. And in some ways, I mean, it's socially conscious entrepreneurship, and
Yep.
it's entrepreneurship with a purpose. That's a cool thing to be able to do.
I'm only interested in big things that have a couple of things to them. They have to have white space. They have to help society. They have to be good business. Rewarding people for being healthy checked all those boxes, right? And as I said before, after I sold that company, I wasn't really looking for the next thing. I'm not what you'd call a serial entrepreneur that you just go from the next thing. And to me, it's the idea that checks those boxes. And when somebody said to me, being an entrepreneur is really lonely, what better way than to help wake up every day and help people with their passion and to turn it into success? And the ability to marry that to important social issues, not just empowering entrepreneurs, but helping, the Black community that lacks a lot of the access and resources that many of us others have, is a really great way to wake up every day.
When you're talking about the services that are offered by the Lonely Entrepreneur, uh, it my initial feeling was that the Lonely Entrepreneur was like a community where you would feel like you belonged. But the more we talk, the more it sounds like it's not necessarily a community. It is equipping you with the tools that are able to help you handle the struggle in a more powerful way. Is that a right understanding?
Yeah, when we took a look at it and said, there's all these people all over the country like putting their heart and soul in it, and I was like, what do they need? Like, what do entrepreneurs need to have a better chance of success? And we said there were three things. One was knowledge, right? I need to know what an income statement is. I need to know what I'm doing when I freak out, right? And everything in the middle. Two is I need tools, like I need templates and legal agreements and what accounting vendor to pick. And finally, I need a place for ongoing support. Like I need coaching and I need a community where I can get my questions answered. So it's all of that. And what we're trying to do is put it in people's hands and say, regardless, like you said before, there's all different challenges at different stages. right? Somebody just has an idea. Somebody has a 15-person company, but's never raised money, right? And everything in the middle. So we're just trying to take them and give them the resources and the guidance we can through our, but what my whole thing was, I wanted to make sure that we could easily put in the hands of lots of people to do it at scale. And that's why we focused on, I mean, we do consulting for individual companies and stuff like that, but most of what we're trying to do is to empower the masses with our platform to have a better chance of success.
I love it. I mean, it's great work, and it's so important and so valuable. One of the things I read about in your bio was about the four P's. Uh, can you tell us what are the four P's, and what are those? How do those? How do those? I was going to say implicate, but how do those apply in business and making business decisions?
You know, it's interesting. When we wrote the book, The Lonely Entrepreneur, we really wanted to delve in, especially given our 2008 experience. We really wanted to delve into what does it actually like to be an entrepreneur? I mean, I know we live, but what is it actually like? And we almost developed our own language around it. Like we used to say things like your balloon is full. So like you ever ask an entrepreneur, like, hey, Michael, do you prefer Mike or Michael? And they give you a half hour on their pricing model, right? Like your balloon, like we had, and what emerged was you're like, well, what does an entrepreneur go through? And we said, wow, there's just like these four P's. And it was like passion, pressure, pleasure, and pain, right? And these are things you go through literally not only in the same year, maybe in the same hour, right? So you have passion for what you're doing. Like, oh, well, somebody says, well, I'm going to do meatballs. And somebody says, well, there's lots of meatballs. And you're like, yeah, but not my meatballs, right? You're just passionate about it.
Right.
You have pressure, financial pressure, job pressure, the pressure of your vision, pleasure, I mean, signing your first customer is like your first kiss, right? It's like and then there's pain, like I said before, the first time an investor doesn't like your business plan, it's like calling your baby ugly. So you're so implicated by these. We always used to say you are under the influence of the four P's, and it makes you do some crazy stuff.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And listen, I think it's kind of my experience was, and I talked about this on a previous podcast. I think I was in maybe fourth grade, but the first time that I ever realized that there was somebody that didn't like me, and it was like, how could you not like me? I'm a nice guy. Like and realizing the same thing applies in business, where you have this concept, as you've said, that you're passionate about and you're all excited about it, and you see the way that it has the potential to change the world and to be a hugely impactful endeavor, and
Yep.
you're like, how about if you join me in this? And they're like, yeah, it's not for me. And it's devastating. Yeah, I'm so interesting. And so when you're looking at those four P's, are, how do you help people with the awareness of them? Because as you talk about them, it makes sense, but how do you help people to recognize those?
Well, I think it's in the context of it's not just the four P's, it's all the stuff we've been talking about, right? It's the tactical stuff you need to know. It's the strategy. I mean, there's just a lot, right? It's legitimately a lot of what you need to know. And so the four P's is just a part of it. What the four P's do at times is really influence us in the wrong way, right? If we believe, for example, oh, we're so passionate about our idea, right, that they go and people make the wrong decisions, right? They don't take in the right feedback or see the market the way they should see it independently and stuff like that. So it's those kind of feelings about, that and ego and humility and all those things along the way. Those are all things that are impacting us. I mean, think about the whole idea of ego, right? Any entrepreneur that's doing something really different, like us going to healthcare and saying you should reward people, and them saying we're never not we haven't heard about this before, but we're never going to do this. You have to have an ego to tell the largest industry in the country that they're going to change.
Right.
And at the same time, you have to have the humility, right, to be able to understand how to learn and grow as a leader. I was a college athlete and a M&A lawyer and a boy, and none of that screams humility, right? And so I think that it's a complicated soup. It's much more chess than checkers. But what you try to do is to take, since we've been there, as many other entrepreneurs have, but we've been there in a pretty unique circumstance. We really do take very seriously what it's like to be them. And then you just try to help them understand from somebody that's been there how that stuff can really have a negative impact on the stuff they need to do to be successful.
Yeah. Just one last quick question, and that is, so much of what you're talking about is things that are surrounding the entrepreneurs, things that are surrounding the individual that struggle. How do you give people the tools to kind of get their eyes off of the struggle that they're experiencing and get them onto their customer and get them onto the customer's need and really build their business that way?
There's certain foundational building blocks that really feel like your effort's going in the right direction. So many people wake up passionate and work really hard and don't get anywhere, right? And those building blocks are partly it's what's your goal, right? To create one pizza stand is a different plan than creating Pizza Hut, right? And so many people don't define that goal. Secondly is, do you have a go-to-market strategy, right? Do you have a playground where nobody else is playing? And you got to fight to find that, because if you don't find that, then you're just one of many. And then a financial plan. I'm going to say this is what I'm going to do over the first 3 years, and these are the goals that I'm going to hit to be able to do that. And all that stuff sounds very, very, like simple and cliche. And in many cases, entrepreneurs don't have those things. With those things, you feel like you have a North Star. Here's my plan. Here are my goals. This is my go-to-market that makes me feel good that I'm going to, like when I woke up and said, rewarding people for being healthy, I knew there were all these big loyalty companies out there, but I knew we were the only one doing this.
Right.
But you really feel like your effort is being aligned to something that's ultimately those foundations that are going to help you win.
Yeah. And you've stated this and it makes a whole lot of sense. In some ways, people become entrepreneurs not because they want to have a business, but because they're passionate about it. And the business side of it is something that is a struggle, and it's something that the lonely entrepreneur is there for. Listen, Michael, thank you so much for sharing. You've given us a lot to think about. If people are looking to find you on the web, what's the easiest way?
Just lonelyentrepreneur.com. You'll find everything there. And, of course, we're on all the social media channels. But if you just go to lonelyentrepreneur.com, everything we're talking about, our learning community is there, our Black Entrepreneur Initiative, our book. And hopefully we just helping people have a better chance of success.
Very cool. I will make sure to put a link to that and to your social media down in the show notes so that people can find you. Michael, thank you. And we are at 3 questions to establish your humanity. You ready for this, my friend?
I'm ready.
Okay. What is your favorite zoo animal?
Zoo animal. That's a good question. I would probably say lion.
Any particular reason?
Yeah, listen, I think just kind of leading, right? Taking on the greatest challenges, having the most gravitas. I mean, that appeals to me.
Absolutely. What kitchen appliance do you use every day?
Before the pandemic, I didn't cook at all, despite having a big kitchen in New York City. Now, I would probably say blender.
Okay. You're making smoothies, I'm assuming?
Yeah, smoothies, stuff like that. Yep.
Yeah. Very cool. Last question. You are in New York City.
Yep.
Okay. There are so many different ethnic neighborhoods and ethnic restaurants. And what is I can't figure out what the proper word is for this, so pardon me for not being politically correct, but what is your favorite type of foreign food or non-American food?
So yeah, in New York, it's unbelievable what you have access to. And I eat pretty healthy, so I like things like Mediterranean, Greek. I have fell in love with this African restaurant. My family took a trip to South Africa a bunch of years ago. And there's just this African restaurant that's just got all different types of flavors and spices. And it's not what you typically would think of in New York. And I just wandered upon it one day. And it's become like my favorite place in New York City.
Sure. All right. So listen, might as well, what's the name of it? So we'll put a link to that in the show notes too.
I actually don't even know the name of it because it's like a side of the whole thing. It's on 26th and 7th Street. I'll send it to you. But
absolutely. Send me that information and I'll make sure to include it. Michael Dermer, you are not just the lonely entrepreneur, but you are now certified officially as a smart person. Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate it. To all my listeners, I will say again, thank you for being here. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. And I will remind you, as always, that when you stop learning, you stop living. Have a great day, everybody.